The small town of Maplewood was the kind of place where every face was familiar and every name carried a story. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, this tight-knit suburban community had a charm that seemed frozen in time. The streets were lined with neatly manicured lawns, and white picket fences bordered cozy homes where neighbors greeted each other with friendly waves. It was a peaceful place, where nothing ever seemed to change, and everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least, they thought they did. Maplewood wasn't the kind of town where mysteries lingered. Gossip traveled faster than the wind, and secrets rarely stayed buried for long. The small grocery store downtown was often abuzz with chatter about the latest happenings, from who was getting married to whose dog had gone missing. But 2 years ago, something new arrived in the town: Jason McMillan. Jason, a quiet and seemingly reserved middle-aged man, moved into one of the largest houses at the edge of the town. The grand brick mansion sat atop a hill, slightly distanced from the other homes, giving Jason an air of privacy that most Maplewood residents couldn't understand. He was wealthy. There was no question about that. His luxury cars gleamed in the driveway, and his home, though imposing, was impeccably maintained. But despite his fortune, Jason wasn't flashy. He rarely attended neighborhood gatherings, and aside from polite nods and occasional small talk, he kept mostly to himself. To the residents of Maplewood, Jason was an enigma. He wasn't rude, but his distant nature left them wondering. What did he do for a living? Why did he choose their small town? And most curiously, why did he spend so much time alone? The town couldn't decide whether to trust him or to fear the unknown. One person, in particular, couldn't let go of his suspicions: Jack Wilkins. Jack was the epitome of a Maplewood neighbor, nosy, inquisitive, and always keeping an eye on everyone's business. In his mid-40s, Jack had lived in Maplewood his entire life, and he prided himself on knowing everything about everyone. So when Jason moved in and remained an outsider, Jack's curiosity was piqued. At first, there was nothing to be concerned about. Jason seemed like a typical wealthy man, perhaps a bit more private than most, but nothing unusual for someone with his means. That was, until Jack noticed something strange: Jason's daily routine. Every morning, at precisely 8:00 a.m., Jason would leave his house in one of his expensive cars. But instead of heading to work or out of town, he would drive to a dilapidated, abandoned garage on the outskirts of Maplewood. The garage had once been part of an old service station, but it had long since fallen into disrepair. The windows were cracked, the doors rusted, and weeds grew around its foundation. It was an eyesore, a forgotten relic of the town's past that no one paid much attention to anymore. Except Jason. Jack noticed that Jason didn't go to the garage alone. Nearly every morning, Jason was accompanied by a young girl, Amaya. She was a 10-year-old black girl who lived with her mother a few houses down from Jack. Amaya was well known in the neighborhood, loved for her bright smile and cheerful personality. She was often seen playing with other kids or helping her mother with groceries. But her frequent visits to the abandoned garage with Jason struck Jack as odd, especially because they stayed there for hours, with no apparent reason. At first, Jack thought little of it. Maybe Jason was just trying to help the girl with something. Maybe they were fixing the garage or using it as a space to work on some harmless project. But the more Jack watched, the more unsettled he became. Jason and Amaya would arrive at the garage in the morning, and they wouldn't leave until the early afternoon. The garage doors always remained shut, and no one could see what was happening inside. There were no sounds of construction, no deliveries, no other visitors, just the two of them disappearing behind those rusty doors day after day. Jack's curiosity slowly turned to suspicion. What could a millionaire and a young girl possibly be doing in a rundown, abandoned garage for hours on end? The idea gnawed at him, keeping him awake at night. Jack wasn't one to let mysteries lie, and this one felt too strange to ignore. He started making excuses to walk by the garage during his morning errands, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was happening inside. But every time he passed by, The scene was the same. Jason's car parked outside, the doors firmly closed, and no signs of activity. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. His mind raced with possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. Was Jason hiding something illegal in that garage? Was he involved in some kind of secret operation? And why was Amaya, an innocent young girl, mixed up in whatever was going on? The more Jack thought about it, the more convinced he became that he needed to do something. He considered going to the authorities, but what would he say? A rich guy is spending time with a girl in an old garage. It didn't sound like much, and without any real evidence, Jack knew he would be brushed off as a paranoid neighbor. But then, one day, Jack caught a glimpse that changed everything. It was a cloudy Tuesday morning, and Jack had decided to take his usual route past the garage, hoping to ease his mind, or at the very least, confirm his suspicions. As he approached, he saw Jason's car parked outside, as usual. But this time, as Jason and Amaya were entering the garage, Jason paused for a moment, looking over his shoulder nervously. That was when Jack saw it. Jason had a large old leather bag slung over his shoulder. It wasn't a gym bag or something casual. It looked more like a tool bag, heavy and worn. Jack's heart raced. His curiosity was now mixed with fear. What could Jason be hiding in that bag? And why did he look so nervous? Jack's imagination went wild. Was it filled with money? Drugs? Weapons? The possibilities were endless, and none of them were good. From that moment on, Jack knew he couldn't just stand by. Something was happening in that garage, something Jason didn't want anyone to know about. And Jack was determined to find out the truth. Little did he know, the answers he would uncover would shock him, and the entire town of Maplewood to its core. The morning after Jack saw Jason with the mysterious leather bag, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. His mind raced with 1,000 different theories, each one darker than the last. And as he mulled over the possibilities, he made a decision. He couldn't keep this to himself any longer. That afternoon, Jack did what came naturally to him in situations like these. He told his neighbors. He started with Susan from 2 houses down, a gossip in her own right, who he knew would spread the word faster than wildfire. They chatted casually over the fence, but Jack quickly slipped in his observations about Jason's strange trips to the garage. Susan raised her eyebrows, and within an hour, the whole block was buzzing. Whispers floated from yard to yard. Overhearing a snippet of conversation at the local diner, Mrs. Henderson muttered to her husband about that rich guy sneaking around with that little girl. At the grocery store, cashiers exchanged glances and lowered their voices whenever Jason's name came up. While the town wasn't ready to confront Jason directly, the seeds of suspicion had been planted, and they took root quickly. Some neighbors dismissed Jack's concerns. "It's probably nothing," they said. "Maybe he's just fixing up the old place." But others weren't so sure. Amaya's mother, Miss Clara, had been working extra shifts at the hospital lately, leaving Amaya more unsupervised than usual. And although Jason had always seemed polite, his strange behavior was starting to raise eyebrows. Rumors swirled. Could Jason be hiding something more sinister behind his kind facade? Jack wasn't content to just wait and see. He had a habit of poking his nose where it didn't belong, and this situation felt like a puzzle he was determined to solve. Armed with his ever-growing suspicions, Jack decided to conduct his own investigation. If no one else was willing to do something about it, he would. Every day, Jack kept a closer eye on Jason's comings and goings. He made a point of walking his dog, Max, at the same time Jason left his house. At first, Jason's movements seemed routine. Drive to the garage, disappear inside with Amaya, and then emerge hours later, often with a tired but satisfied look on his face. But the more Jack watched, the more he noticed subtle details that made him uneasy. Jason always scanned his surroundings before entering the garage, as if checking to see if anyone was watching. His movements, once relaxed, became tense and deliberate, his eyes darting around like a man with something to hide. On a few occasions, Jason would linger by the garage door, fiddling with something in his hand, maybe a key or a lock, before slipping inside with Amaya trailing behind. The sight of the young girl, so innocent and trusting, gnawed at Jack's conscience. What was Jason doing with her in there? As the days passed, Jack grew more determined. He wasn't sure what Jason was hiding, but he knew that it wasn't good. The image of the worn leather bag kept replaying in his mind. Could it be filled with money? Something illegal? His imagination ran wild, feeding into his growing paranoia. Then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Jack had positioned himself near a cluster of trees, giving him a perfect vantage point to observe the garage without being seen. He watched as Jason arrived at the garage, this time without Amaya. Jack felt a twinge of disappointment. He had hoped to see what Jason was up to with her. But he stayed, determined to see if anything unusual would occur. As Jason unlocked the garage and slipped inside, Jack waited, expecting him to be alone. But after a few minutes, he noticed movement from the other side of the garage. His heart raced as he saw another figure approaching. A woman. She was in her early 40s, with short, dark hair and a worn expression. She carried a large canvas bag over her shoulder and moved with a sense of purpose, as if she'd been there before. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Who was this woman? And why was she meeting Jason in the middle of nowhere at an abandoned garage? The woman knocked twice on the garage door before Jason let her in. Jack strained to hear any snippets of conversation, but they spoke in hushed tones, too quiet for him to make out. The interaction was brief, no more than a few minutes, but it left Jack reeling. This was no ordinary visit. Jason was clearly hiding something, and this woman was part of whatever secret he was keeping. Jack's mind raced as he processed what he had seen. The presence of a second person, especially a woman, only deepened the mystery. Was she an accomplice? A business partner in something illegal? Or was she somehow involved with Amaya, perhaps overseeing whatever was happening with the young girl? Jack didn't know, but he was more certain than ever that something shady was going on in that garage. As Jack continued to follow Jason over the next few days, his suspicions grew. The woman began appearing more frequently, always at odd times, and always with the same guarded demeanor. Sometimes she would meet Jason in the garage before Amaya arrived, and other times she left just before the girl showed up. It was as if they were coordinating something that required secrecy and precision. Jack's paranoia intensified. His gut told him that Jason and the mysterious woman were involved in something dangerous, and Amaya was somehow caught in the middle. The thought of the innocent girl being used for some nefarious purpose filled Jack with dread. He wanted to march right up to the garage and confront Jason, demand to know what was going on, but he hesitated. What if he was wrong? What if Jason and the woman weren't doing anything illegal? Or worse, what if confronting them only put Amaya in more danger? Jack knew he couldn't afford to act rashly. He needed proof. Without solid evidence, no one would believe him, and he'd just be seen as the town's nosy busybody. Still, Jack couldn't sit by and do nothing. He considered calling the police, but he wasn't ready for that step yet. What would he tell them? That a millionaire and a mysterious woman were spending time in an old garage with a young girl. Without more information, the authorities would likely brush him off. He needed more concrete evidence before he could get anyone involved. So Jack kept watching. Day after day, he monitored Jason's movements, tracking his visits to the garage, and noting the comings and goings of the mysterious woman. He made mental notes of everything. The times, the bags they carried, the way they always glanced around before entering. Every detail, no matter how small, felt like another piece of the puzzle. The tension was building, and Jack knew it was only a matter of time before something big happened. He could feel it in his bones. Whatever Jason and the woman were up to, it was about to come to a head, and Jack was determined to be there when it did. But little did he know, the truth behind the garage was far more shocking than anything he could have imagined. The tension had been building for weeks, and Jack could no longer resist the pull of his growing suspicions. After watching Jason's routine for so long, it was only a matter of time before his curiosity got the best of him. One particularly overcast afternoon, as Jack stood behind the familiar cluster of trees that had become his stakeout spot, he saw Jason's car pull up to the garage once again. This time, Amaya was with him, and Jack could see the same old leather bag slung over Jason's shoulder. But there was something different about today. The air felt heavier, as if something significant was about to unfold. Jack had felt this kind of tension before, a thick, gut-wrenching feeling that told him today wasn't like all the other days. He wasn't going to just stand by and watch anymore. As soon as Jason and Amaya entered the garage, Jack decided to take action. His heart pounded in his chest as he quickly crossed the empty street and made his way toward the side of the building. The dilapidated structure loomed over him, its faded paint and rusted metal siding adding to the eerie atmosphere. Jack felt like he was stepping into a scene from a crime thriller, only this time, he was the protagonist, and what he was about to discover could change everything. With careful, calculated movements, Jack edged closer to a side window. The glass was cracked, and dust had collected along the frame, making it difficult to see inside. Jack hesitated for a moment, his breath catching in his throat. He knew there was no turning back. His pulse quickened as he bent down to peer through the fogged window. What he saw next shocked him to his core. Inside the garage, Jason wasn't doing anything sinister or illegal. Far from it. He was standing at a large wooden workbench in the center of the room, carefully demonstrating how to measure and cut a piece of wood. Beside him, Amaya stood on a stool, watching intently as Jason explained each step. The mysterious woman, whom Jack had come to fear, was there as well, but instead of some nefarious role, she was handing Jason tools and offering words of encouragement to Amaya. The scene was nothing like Jack had imagined. The garage wasn't a hideout for illegal activity. It had been transformed into a makeshift workshop. Wooden planks, tools, and pieces of discarded furniture were scattered across the room. Against the far wall stood several handcrafted chairs, tables, and shelves, all in various stages of completion. It was a workshop where Jason was teaching Amaya, and it seemed other children how to craft furniture from scratch. Jack blinked, unable to believe what he was seeing. His mind raced to catch up with the reality before him. Jason wasn't a criminal. He wasn't hiding anything sinister. He was using his wealth and his skills to teach woodworking to children like Amaya, children from underprivileged backgrounds who wouldn't normally have access to such opportunities. The garage, once an abandoned relic of the past, had become a place of creativity and learning. As Jack watched, Jason spoke softly to Amaya, encouraging her as she nervously handled the tools. The woman, who Jack now realized was some kind of social worker, stood nearby, offering gentle guidance when needed. Amaya's face lit up with pride as she successfully sanded down the edge of a wooden plank, her small hand steady under Jason's watchful eye. Jack's heart sank. All this time, he had suspected Jason of something terrible, but the truth was far more beautiful than he could have imagined. Jason wasn't hiding anything shameful. He was quietly giving back to the community in a way that no one had expected. It wasn't long before Jack heard the two adults talking, and from their conversation, the full story began to unfold. Jason had grown up in a rough part of town, not far from Maplewood, in a community that had seen better days. His family struggled to make ends meet, and as a teenager, he had fallen in with the wrong crowd. But there was one thing that had saved him from a life of poverty and bad decisions: woodworking. An elderly neighbor, seeing the trouble Jason was heading for, took him under his wing and taught him the craft. Jason spent hours learning how to carve, build, and repair furniture. It was a skill that not only gave him a sense of purpose, but also helped him earn a living when he had nothing else. Over the years, Jason had turned that simple skill into a successful business. He began designing custom furniture for wealthy clients, and as his reputation grew, so did his fortune. But despite his financial success, Jason never forgot where he came from. The memories of his own difficult childhood stayed with him, and he always felt a responsibility to give back in some way. That's when the woman, Marie, the social worker, entered the picture. She had been working with at-risk children in the city, trying to provide them with positive outlets and skill-building opportunities. Amaya was one of her most promising students, a bright and eager girl who loved learning but had limited resources. Marie had introduced Jason to Amaya after learning about his desire to quietly help children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Jason, wanting to avoid the attention that often came with charity work, had chosen the old garage as a discreet location to teach woodworking to kids like Amaya. He had poured his time, money, and heart into creating a space where they could learn valuable skills without judgment or interference. It was his way of paying forward the kindness that had saved him so many years ago. The garage wasn't just a place to build furniture, it was a sanctuary. For Amaya and the other children Jason had worked with, it was a place where they could be creative, learn practical skills, and feel empowered. It was a place where they were given a chance to succeed in a world that often overlooked them. As Jack stood there, hidden behind the window, a wave of guilt washed over him. He had been so quick to judge, so quick to assume the worst. All this time, Jason had been doing something beautiful, something selfless, and Jack had been too blinded by his own suspicions to see it. Suddenly, the workshop grew quiet, and Jack realized that Jason had stopped speaking. The door to the garage creaked open, and Jack instinctively ducked down behind a pile of crates. He watched as Jason and Marie stepped outside, laughing softly as they discussed their next project. Jack could hear their words clearly now, and what he heard next sent a shock through his system. Mary was talking about expanding the program. She had recently secured funding from a local charity, and they were planning to bring in more children, boys and girls from nearby towns who, like Amaya, needed a chance to learn, grow, and build something with their own hands. Jason smiled at the thought, clearly proud of what they had accomplished so far. The two walked down the path, leaving the garage behind, and Jack finally felt like he could breathe again. He stayed crouched behind the crates for a long time, trying to process everything he had just witnessed. Jason wasn't a criminal. He wasn't hiding something sinister. He was a man who had been quietly working to change the lives of children who, without him, might never have had a chance. Jack's world had been turned upside down. Everything he thought he knew had been wrong. And now, as he stood there, looking at the garage that had once seemed so mysterious, he realized something even more profound. This wasn't just Jason's story. This was a story about the quiet heroes in every community, the people who work behind the scenes to make a difference without asking for recognition or praise. Jack knew he had to tell someone. But this time, it wouldn't be out of suspicion or fear. It would be to celebrate the incredible work Jason was doing, to share the truth about the man who had been hiding in plain sight, quietly changing the world one handcrafted table at a time. Jack stood there, still reeling from the revelation he had just witnessed. His mind buzzed with conflicting emotions, relief, guilt, and overwhelming shame. All the suspicions he had nurtured for weeks now seemed so foolish, so unfounded. He had painted Jason as some sort of villain, when in reality, he was the quiet hero of their town, doing good in ways no one had imagined. Jack knew that he needed to make things right, to share the truth with the community. The next morning, over coffee at the local diner, Jack found himself sitting with a group of longtime Maplewood residents. They were gossiping, as usual, about everything from whose kid had gotten into trouble at school to the weather forecast for the weekend. But Jack's mind was elsewhere. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to start. After all, he had been the one who spread the initial rumors about Jason's odd behavior. How could he undo the damage? Finally, he spoke up. "Y'all aren't going to believe this," Jack said, his voice more subdued than usual. The table fell silent, eyes turning toward him expectantly. "I found out what Jason's been doing at that old garage," Jack began, glancing at their curious faces. "It's nothing like what we thought. I was wrong." dead wrong. Jason's not up to anything shady. He's been using that garage to teach woodworking to kids like Amaya. He's been giving back, quietly, without telling anyone. There was a pause. The disbelief was palpable. What? Susan, the town gossip, said with a raised eyebrow. He's been teaching kids to build furniture. Jack nodded. He grew up poor, didn't have much of a chance himself until someone taught him those skills. Now he's paying it forward. He's helping Amaya, and other kids too. And that woman, she's not his accomplice or anything like that. She's a social worker. They're running this program for kids who need it the most. The group sat in stunned silence, processing what Jack had just revealed. The waitress, overhearing the conversation, stopped mid-pour, her eyes widening. "Are you serious?" Another neighbor asked, blinking in disbelief. "All this time, we thought." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of his guilt again. "I know. I thought the worst too. But I saw it with my own eyes. He's not the man we thought he was." Within hours, the word spread through Maplewood like wildfire. People were floored by the revelation. Some were deeply moved by Jason's generosity, their hearts softening at the idea that someone so wealthy and private would dedicate his time and money to helping children in need. Others, however, felt embarrassed, realizing that they had jumped to the worst conclusions about a man they barely knew. Whispers of shame circulated in hushed tones around the town. How could they have been so wrong? Despite the mixed reactions, there was one undeniable truth. Jason's secret was out. It wasn't long before the story reached beyond the small confines of Maplewood. Susan, unable to contain herself, mentioned it to a reporter she knew from a local news outlet. The reporter, intrigued by the idea of a millionaire quietly running a woodworking program for disadvantaged kids, paid Jason an unexpected visit. By the end of the week, Jason's quiet little initiative had become headline news. The Millionaire Woodworker. Man teaches life skills to local kids in secret garage program. The headline read in bold letters. The news spread quickly, catching the attention of other media outlets. Local television stations picked up the story, followed by regional newspapers and even a few national blogs. Soon, Maplewood was inundated with journalists and reporters eager to get a closer look at Jason's project. What had started as a simple personal effort to help a few kids had ballooned into a public spectacle. Donations started pouring in from all over the country. Well-meaning people, inspired by the story, wanted to support Jason's efforts. Charitable organizations reached out, offering funding, equipment, and even volunteers to expand the program. For the first time since he had started the woodworking initiative, Jason found himself overwhelmed by the attention. It was never his intention to go public. Jason had always preferred working behind the scenes, helping quietly, without the burden of the spotlight. Now, he was the subject of media scrutiny and public fascination, and it was all happening faster than he could manage. Jason tried to keep a low profile, but it was nearly impossible with the media knocking on his door and people offering donations at every turn. The town of Maplewood, which had once been a quiet little community, was suddenly swarming with strangers, journalists, curious visitors, and even potential sponsors. What should have felt like a triumph, a validation of his good work, instead felt like an invasion of everything Jason had tried to protect. Amaya, too, was affected by the attention. Her once private lessons with Jason, which had been a safe and quiet escape from her sometimes difficult life, were now under public scrutiny. People knew her name, and some even recognized her face from the news stories. At school, she was no longer just Amaya. She was the girl who's learning from the millionaire. Some kids teased her, others treated her differently, and the pressure to perform well in Jason's classes grew heavier by the day. Even Marie, the social worker who had helped connect Jason with the kids, started to express concerns. During one particularly busy day at the garage, she pulled Jason aside. "I'm worried," she said, her brow furrowed. "This program was never meant to be so public. These kids like Amaya, need a safe space, away from all the noise. I'm afraid the media attention and the constant donations could change the dynamic." They might feel more like charity cases than kids here to learn and grow. Jason nodded, his face grim. He understood the problem all too well. What had started as a quiet personal mission to give back had become something much bigger than he had anticipated. He could feel control slipping through his fingers. And the more attention the program received, the more he worried that the original purpose, to help kids like Amaya feel empowered, was being lost. There were practical challenges too. With so many people offering donations and wanting to volunteer, Jason found himself spending more time managing the logistics than actually teaching the kids. The garage, which had once been a sanctuary of learning and creativity, was now filled with stacks of donated materials, press clippings, and people offering unsolicited advice on how to expand the initiative. Jason began to wonder if the program was still his. It was slipping out of his hands, morphing into something he never intended. He missed the simplicity of those early days, where it was just him, the kids, and the joy of creating something beautiful out of discarded materials. For Amaya, the weight of the attention grew unbearable. The lessons, which had once been her favorite part of the week, now felt like a burden. She had to be perfect, had to live up to the image the media had painted of her. She couldn't just be a 10-year-old girl learning something new. She had to be the girl in Jason's program. The joy of discovery and creativity started to fade, replaced by anxiety and stress. One day, as Jason and Amaya worked quietly on a new piece, she looked up at him, her voice small but clear. "Mr. Jason," she said, her eyes downcast, "do you ever wish things could go back to the way they were?" Jason paused, setting down his tools. He looked at the young girl who had been the heart of his project, and he felt a pang of guilt. "Every day, Amaya," he replied softly. "Every single day." As the dust settled and the media attention began to fade, Jason found himself standing alone in the quiet garage, staring at the half-finished projects scattered across the workbenches. The air smelled of sawdust and varnish, familiar and comforting. But the silence, which had once been his sanctuary, now felt heavy with a strange mix of emotions he hadn't anticipated. Jason's simple act of giving back, something he had begun in private, had grown into something far beyond his control. In many ways, he was proud of the children who had come through his doors, proud of the skills they had learned, and proud that his little program had brought so much positive attention to the community. But underneath that pride lay a deep, unsettling conflict. He never wanted the spotlight. He had chosen this quiet, unassuming path because he believed that real change didn't need fanfare. Jason had always thought that by working behind the scenes, he could forge genuine connections with the children, teach them not just how to build furniture, but how to build themselves. He had hoped to offer them something much more valuable than a simple skill: confidence, resilience, and the belief that they could shape their futures with their own hands. Now, with donations flooding in, volunteers eager to join, and expectations from people across the country, Jason felt that personal connection slipping away. What once felt intimate and transformative now felt like an enterprise, something that needed to be managed, measured, and monitored. He missed the days when it was just him, Amaya, and a few other kids, laughing as they struggled through their first projects, learning together. The garage had become a refuge for them, and now it felt like the world had invaded that sacred space. Jason paced the room, running his hands along the smooth edges of a table Amaya had recently finished. He couldn't deny the positive outcomes: the children's growing confidence, the community's newfound appreciation for the power of hands-on learning. But he also couldn't shake the feeling that something vital had been lost along the way. He wondered if it was possible to recapture the magic of those early days, or if the program had grown too big, too fast, for him to ever go back. As he stood there in the dim light of the garage, Jason realized that this project had changed him too. His quiet mission had forced him into the spotlight, and whether he liked it or not, people now looked to him as a leader. He had a responsibility to the children, the town, and even the strangers from afar who believed in what he was doing. But deep down, Jason knew that leadership wasn't about expansion or attention. It was about staying true to his original vision, even when the world was watching. For Amaya, the woodworking program had been nothing short of life-changing. When she first stepped into the old, dusty garage with Jason, she was shy, unsure of herself, and uncertain of what she was capable of. But over the months, as she learned to measure, cut, and create, something inside her began to change. Each completed project, whether it was a simple chair or a complex table, was a testament to her hard work, patience, and growing skill. Her confidence soared. She no longer felt like the quiet girl who stayed in the background, but someone with real talent and purpose. And as word spread about Jason's program, Amaya found herself becoming something of a role model in the community. Kids in the neighborhood, some younger than her, would ask about her experiences in the garage, fascinated by the idea that she could make beautiful things with her own hands. It wasn't long before Amaya started teaching some of the other children what she had learned from Jason. At first, it was just a few neighborhood kids who gathered around her in the evenings, curious about her woodworking tools. Amaya showed them how to use a hammer, how to sand wood properly, how to be patient with a project. It felt good to share what she had learned, and even better to see the awe in their eyes when they completed their first pieces. But as the program's fame grew, so did the pressure. Amaya found herself struggling with the weight of people's expectations. She wasn't just a student in Jason's program anymore. She was the girl who had been featured in news stories, the face of this suddenly famous initiative. Teachers at school started asking about her projects, and other kids looked up to her as some sort of woodworking prodigy. The attention, which at first had been exciting, soon became overwhelming. Amaya missed the quiet, private lessons in the garage. She missed the simplicity of working side by side with Jason, learning at her own pace without the world watching. Now, every time she picked up a tool, she felt like she had to prove herself. The joy of discovery had been replaced by a gnawing anxiety. What if she messed up? What if people expected more from her than she could deliver? Still, deep down, Amaya knew that her time in the garage had given her more than just a skill. It had given her a sense of identity, a belief that she could accomplish anything she set her mind to. And despite the pressure, she remained grateful for that. But she couldn't help but wonder, would things ever go back to the way they were? Could she ever just be Amaya, the girl who loved to build things, without all the noise? As the story of Jason's secret woodworking program spread, the town of Maplewood found itself in an unfamiliar position. For years, the town had been quiet, a place where nothing much ever happened. But now, it was the focus of national attention, and people had mixed feelings about it. Some were in awe of what Jason had accomplished. They admired the fact that, without seeking recognition or applause, he had found a way to give back to the community in such a meaningful way. Parents whose children had participated in the program spoke glowingly of how it had changed their kids' lives, giving them confidence and skills they might never have developed otherwise. People were proud to live in a town with someone like Jason, someone who cared deeply and gave selflessly. But not everyone was thrilled. There were those who felt uneasy about the secrecy of it all. They wondered why Jason had kept the program hidden for so long. Was it really necessary to be so private about something so positive? Some felt that the town should have been involved earlier, that the community had a right to know about something that was ultimately so impactful. They questioned Jason's motives, even going so far as to suggest that he had something to hide. Others criticized the way the program had suddenly blown up, feeling that the media attention had taken something special and turned it into a spectacle. Some of the town's older residents, who valued privacy and tradition, were uncomfortable with all the outsiders showing up to get a glimpse of Jason's kids. They felt like their quiet town had been invaded, and they weren't sure how to handle it. There were even whispers of jealousy. Some people resented the fact that their children hadn't been part of the program from the beginning. Why had Jason chosen certain kids and not others? Why had he worked so quietly, without involving the broader community? The program, which had once seemed like a purely positive force, was now the subject of debate and division. The influx of donations and attention also created tension. While many appreciated the additional resources for the program, others worried that it was losing its original spirit. What had started as a grassroots initiative, built on personal relationships and quiet dedication, now felt like a larger, more corporate operation. Some feared that the heart of the project, Jason's personal mentorship and care for the kids, was being lost in the rush to expand and accommodate all the new attention. In the end, the town of Maplewood was left to grapple with its new reality. Jason's program had brought out the best and worst in people: admiration, skepticism, pride, and insecurity. And while the impact on the children was undeniably positive, the community as a whole had been changed forever. The sudden surge of attention had caught Jason off guard, but after weeks of reflection, he decided that the program he had started could no longer stay hidden in the shadows. The influx of donations and support couldn't be ignored, and although he longed for the simplicity of the old days, he recognized that the need to help children extended far beyond the walls of his garage. Sitting in his study late one evening, surrounded by blueprints and sketches of furniture designs, Jason came to a decision. He would formalize the program, turning it into something bigger than himself, a foundation that could help more children, not just in Maplewood, but in neighboring communities as well. The woodworking lessons, which had started as a personal act of giving back, would now be part of a structured initiative designed to empower underprivileged kids through the craft he loved so much. But there was one thing Jason knew he wouldn't compromise on: the personal connection he had with the children. The foundation would grow, but Jason was adamant that small private sessions, just like the ones he had with Amaya, would remain at the heart of the program. These sessions would be reserved for kids who needed the extra attention and encouragement that Jason had once needed himself as a boy. He wanted to keep that sacred space alive, the place where children could learn not just woodworking, but confidence and resilience. The program was formalized as the Hands That Build Foundation, dedicated to teaching practical skills, fostering creativity, and helping children believe in their own potential. The town of Maplewood rallied around the idea, with local businesses offering to donate materials and schools incorporating woodworking into their after-school activities. The foundation's mission spread quickly, and Jason found himself leading something that, though larger, still held the spirit of his original vision. As for Amaya, her transformation was remarkable. Once a quiet, shy girl who hadn't quite known where she fit in, she had become a confident and inspiring figure in the community. Using the skills Jason had taught her, she started teaching younger kids in her neighborhood, acting as a mentor to those who, like her, needed someone to believe in them. Word of her accomplishments spread, and she became a symbol of what the foundation was all about: turning potential into tangible achievement. Amaya didn't just stop at woodworking. She began organizing small groups of children, encouraging them to explore their own creative interests, whether it was art, music, or even coding. What Jason had started in that dusty old garage was now a ripple effect, with Amaya leading the charge as a role model for her peers. As Jason's foundation grew and the program became more structured, Marie, the social worker who had been quietly helping him from the beginning, revealed a story that no one, least of all Jason, had known. One evening, after a particularly busy day of planning and organizing for the foundation's expansion, Jason and Marie sat in the now much busier garage. Amid the clamor of hammers and the laughter of children, Marie shared something deeply personal. "You know, Jason," she began, her voice soft but steady, "the reason I've been so committed to this project isn't just because I'm a social worker. It's because I was once a part of something like this when I was a kid." Jason looked at her in surprise. Marie, who had always been the calm, composed professional, suddenly seemed more vulnerable. She continued, her gaze distant as if remembering a time long ago. "I grew up in a rough neighborhood," she explained. "We didn't have much, no resources, no guidance. I was on the verge of dropping out of school when a local carpenter took me and a few other kids under his wing. He taught us how to work with our hands, how to build things, and more importantly, how to build ourselves up. It gave me a way out, a chance to see that my life didn't have to be defined by where I came from. Jason listened in silence, realizing that Marie's involvement in his project had been deeply personal all along. "That program saved my life," Marie continued, her voice now filled with emotion. "It's the reason I became a social worker. I wanted to give back in the same way someone once gave to me. So when I met you, and you told me what you wanted to do for these kids, I knew I had to be a part of it." Jason sat back, stunned by the revelation. Marie wasn't just a social worker who had stumbled onto his project. She was living proof of what programs like his could achieve. Her story only strengthened Jason's resolve to keep the foundation focused on real, meaningful connections, knowing that the work they were doing could change the course of a child's life, just as it had changed Marie's. The town of Maplewood, once suspicious and divided over Jason's secret project, had undergone its own transformation. The revelation of Jason's work, coupled with the attention from the media, had left an indelible mark on the community. At first, the town had struggled with the newfound fame, unsure how to handle the influx of attention and the scrutiny from outsiders. But over time, the people of Maplewood came to embrace Jason's foundation, seeing it not just as a charitable initiative, but as a point of pride for their town. Neighbors who had once doubted Jason's intentions now found themselves volunteering at the foundation, offering their own skills and time to help the children. People who had been wary of the secrecy around the project now saw the bigger picture: Jason's desire to make a real impact, quietly, without fanfare. The foundation became a symbol of the town's resilience and generosity, bringing people together in ways they hadn't expected. The once quiet millionaire was now a local hero, though Jason remained as humble and private as ever. He didn't seek out the praise, and whenever someone congratulated him, he simply nodded and redirected the attention back to the kids. For Jason, the foundation was never about him. It was about the children, their growth, and the opportunities he could provide for them. In the end, Maplewood was forever changed by Jason's actions. The town, which had once been suspicious of outsiders and hesitant to embrace change, had opened its arms to something new and extraordinary. Jason's program had not only empowered the children it served, but it had also united the community in a way that few could have predicted. As the story of Jason's transformation and the growth of the hands that build foundation comes to a close, it leaves the audience with a lingering, thought-provoking question. How many people around us are quietly doing extraordinary things that we overlook? What would you do if you uncovered a life-changing secret in your own community? This question invites viewers to reflect on their own communities, to consider the hidden acts of kindness, generosity, and service that often go unnoticed. It challenges them to think about how they might respond if they stumbled upon something similar. Would they spread rumors, or would they dig deeper to uncover the truth? Would they support those making a difference, or stand on the sidelines, skeptical? In a world where so much of what we see is driven by spectacle and attention, Jason's story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful acts are the quiet ones, the ones that happen behind closed doors, with no expectation of reward. And it begs the question: how many Jasons are out there, quietly changing the world, one child at a time?